Cyber Dragon is a 2100 attack beater which can special summon itself for free if only your opponent controls a monster. This card is said to have revolutionized Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in 2005, as it was pretty much the first good free special to be put into the game. In this video we'll be going over the best monsters with the same summoning condition as the one who started it all. Starting out at number 10, we have Ancient Warrior's Loyal Guan. This is a level 7 Wind Beast Warrior with 2500 attack and 1800 defense, which can special summon itself if only your opponent controls a monster. While it's on the field, it also prevents other Ancient Warriors monsters you control from being targeted by card effects. Also, it has an effect to target and pop a monster the opponent controls if they control more monsters than you do. This card received some hype when it was initially released, because it came out the same month that Dinowrestler Pankratops was limited. Pank was a huge player in the meta while it was at 3, and Guan was just similar enough for people to think that it could fill that gap. Despite being a huge beater that can special summon itself for free when going second, and having a pop effect, this card ended up falling far short of replacing Pank. For starters, while Pankratops was an inherent summon, Guan special summons itself as an effect, which means your opponent can just negate that effect with something like Appaloosa. Secondly, its pop effect is just 1,000 times worse than Pank's is. It's not a quick effect, which means they can just remove Guan on summon before you have a chance to activate it. In the end, it just wasn't good enough to see play, and Pank wouldn't see itself power crept until much later. That being said, Guan is at least decent within its own archetype, giving you protection against cards like Infinite Impermanence on your main starter, Virtuous Juan. Though it wasn't good enough to make an impact on the metagame due to its reliance on the opponent having more cards, it was at least good enough for a single top through the years. And at number 9 we have Evilswarm Mandragora. This is a level 4 dark plant monster which can special summon itself from the hand if your opponent controls more monsters than you do. At first glance, Mandragora may seem worse than other similar options. Its mediocre stats make it an inferior beater to Cyber Dragon, and it's not a consistent level 4 extender like Photon Thrasher. However, it was still a vital part of its deck back in the day. Since it's part of the Evilswarm archetype, it can be used to summon Evilswarm Ophion, which is the only reason why the deck was even playable in the first place. Ophion prevents level 5 or higher monsters from being special summoned while it has Ixie material, and it can search Infestation Pandemic, which makes all your Illswarm monsters unaffected by spell trap effects. Having access to this card made this deck one of the few viable rogue options back when Dragon Rulers were ravaging the metagame. If you can set up Ophion first turn, not only does it prevent all the rulers from coming down, since they are all level 7, but it also severely limits other engines played in Dragon Rulers, such as Mythic Dragons and Debris Dragon. Outside of Blaster's hand effect, the only out to this in D Rulers is back row, but Infestation makes it so that your opponent would need 2 outs, since the first one would always be blanked. Mandragora played a vital role in being the one Evilswarm that can special summon itself, giving you some means of going into Ophion even if you didn't draw the deck's best starters, Rescue Rabbit and Evilswarm Heliotrope. When sticking a Floodgate is your main win con, you really want as many ways to put it down as possible within the first few turns of the game. While this deck saw most of its play as a budget option to beat Dragon Rulers back when they were dominating the game, and it's never been the best deck at any point in the game, Evilswarm also managed to see some tops at later points in the Ixie era, due to their ability to completely shut down decks like Sylvans or Karakuri. And now at number 8 we have Cockadoodledoo. This is a level 5 Wind Winged Beast tuner, which can special summon itself as a level 3 if there are no monsters on the field, and as a level 4 if your opponent controls a monster and you control no cards. Also, if this card would leave the field, it gets banished instead. Cockadoodledoo sets itself apart from most of the other free extenders by being one of the few that is a tuner. This aspect, as well as its level modulation effect, lets it see play in quite a few decks as a synchro enabler. The first popular instance of this was in Qliphort, as their playstyle meant they could easily spare the extra deck space. By bringing out this card and then normal summoning a Qli, you could go into either Power Tool Dragon to search Sacrifice, or Scrap Dragon to pop your scales and set up for a Pendulum summon. Though it wasn't a staple or anything, it would remain a tech card in multiple decks throughout the years, since the Synchro 7 and 8 pools offer amazing options such as Yazi, Evil of the Yang Zing, and Clearwing Synchro Dragon. Cockadoodledoo would eventually see its last stint of play as an option in ABC. The deck's game plan is to summon ABC Dragon Buster, which needs to banish its 3 materials from the field or graveyard to special summon itself. To accomplish this, the archetype usually had to play some kind of sub-engine to help get the pieces into the graveyard. The most popular one was using the Gadget engine to go into Bujinte Tsukiyomi, though people would eventually experiment with synchro-focused variants instead. By playing Cockadoodledoo and Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Frisian, they'd get to use the Synchro pool to its fullest potential, going through either Black Rose Dragon to clear boards, or Pre-Errata Ancient Fairy Dragon to extend and find Union Hanger. Destrudo was generally the better card since it could be accessed through Dragon Ravine and didn't require an empty field, but Cockadoodledoo was still well worth running, as it could also make powerful level 8s, such as Psyframe Lord Omega, which can hand loop the opponent every turn. And in at number 7, we have Hieratic Dragon of Tefnuit. This is a light dragon monster which can special summon itself from the hand if only the opponent controls a monster, but it cannot attack the turn it is special summoned this way. When it is tributed, you special summon a dragon normal monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard, but its attack becomes 0. Tefnuit was one of the best cards for Hieratics back when they first came out. The strategy centered around these high-level dragons, which all shared the effect to special summon a normal dragon from the deck when tributed. Hieratic Dragon of Tefnuit and Esset were the only 2 that could special summon themselves without prior setup, while Su and Nebthet could special summon themselves from the hand by tributing a Hieratic monster. By tributing over a Hieratic, you'd get them to bring out a normal dragon from the deck, usually Watt-tailed Dragon, to set up for rank 6 plays. Pretty much no other deck had such easy access to this level, and it contained some of the most powerful extra deck monsters at the time. There was Photon Strike Bouncer, which was a monster negate, and Hieratic Dragon of Atum, their archetypal Ixie, which could summon any dragon monster from the deck. While this strategy had a few tops to its name, it could never quite get a good hold on the meta due to its inherent brickiness. There just weren't any other good Hieratics to play outside of the 4 I just mentioned. Even with an archetypal non-once-per-turn Rhoda at 3, that's only 15 slots out of the 40 dedicated to your main strategy, and you have to draw onto a specific combination of 2 of them in order to play. Summoning Tefnuit and then tributing it for Su was one of the strongest plays around, but it just wasn't happening often enough. This led to players maxing out on as many consistency cards as they could, making use of things like Card D, Pot of Duality, and even One Day of Peace, despite the fact that those cards seemed completely out of place in a combo deck. Eventually, Hieratics would come back into the metagame as an engine in Dragon Rulers, after that archetype was hit on the ban list. This is where they would find the most success, as synergies between those 2 helped shore up the flaws of each archetype. And coming in at number 6, we have Heroic Challenger Assault Halberd. This is a level 4 Earth Warrior monster with 1800 attack and 200 defense, which can special summon itself if only the opponent controls monsters. It inflicts piercing damage when attacking, and if it deals damage to the opponent, you can add 1 heroic card from the deck to the hand. Assault Halberd played a major role in a very interesting rank 4 spam deck. Clown Blade, as it was called, was a popular deck from the early Pendulum era in the OCG, which was focused entirely around spamming level 4 monsters onto the board. It did so by combining the Performages, which used Performage Hat Tricker and Trick Clown to provide easy extension and reusable bodies, along with the Heroics, which used Assault Halberd and Thousand Blades to do essentially the same thing. The strategy reached its peak when you managed to get both of the engines online. Trick Clown special summons itself from the grave by inflicting damage to you, which triggers Thousand Blades, who summons itself from the grave when you take damage. This provided you with a nearly endless stream of material to go into some of the strongest extra deck monsters of the time. You had Castell to spin a card on the field, Abyss Dweller to shut down any graveyard strategies with its lingering floodgate effect, and Evilswarm Exciton Knight to get you back into the game by blowing up all other cards on the field when you were behind. And that's just to name a few. The rank 4 toolbox is still one of the strongest in today's metagame, and almost nothing could rival it back in the day. Assault Halberd helped you start out your game plan by giving you a free summon early, which would then allow you to search Thousand Blades if your opponent ever let one of its attacks through. However, while this deck was a pretty popular choice in the OCG, it never did much in the West. This is because one of the deck's most powerful plays was going into Cyber Dragon Infinity with Tellarknight Ptolemaeus, which wasn't available in the TCG until after this deck's time in the spotlight. And in at number 5, we have TG Striker. This is a level 2 Earth Warrior Tuner monster with 800 attack and 0 defense, which can special summon itself if only the opponent controls a monster. During the end phase, if it was destroyed on the field and sent to the graveyard, you can add a TG monster from your deck to your hand. TG Striker was one of the first instances of an archetypal Cyber Dragon to actually see play. Despite its mediocre stats, it had a lot going for it, which made Striker a guaranteed 3 of in every TG deck list. It played such a role in the deck's effectiveness that it even got limited not long after release, and was only allowed to come back to 3 years later. What made Striker so good is how insane of an extender it was in the deck. When it special summons itself, it also triggers TG Warwolf's hand effect to special summon itself. This enabled you to go into a level 5 synchro without even spending your normal summon. Not only does this pool allow you to access Ally of Justice Catastor to get rid of non-dark threats, but since both monsters are Earth attribute, you can bring out Naturia Beast to lock your opponent from using spells. Alternatively, if you could afford to normal summon TG Rush Rhino, you could go into Brionic with its non-once per turn bounce at the time, or Naturia Barkion to stop your opponent from activating trap cards. While your TGs wouldn't trigger their floating effects if they were used for a synchro summon, they would if your opponent tried to disrupt you with something like Torrential Tribute, allowing you to get all your card advantage back during the end phase. Also, their graveyard effect had immense synergy with their archetypal trap, TG1EM1, which lets you trade a TG monster on your field for one of your opponent's monsters. You could then beat over your own monster by battle to get its floating effect. Back in the day, TG decks were remarkable for their resilience and good advantage game, and this is in no small part due to TG Striker. And coming in at number 4, we have Toon Cyber Dragon. This is a level 5 machine monster with the same stats and summoning condition as regular Cyber Dragon. However, as a Toon monster, it cannot attack the turn it's summoned, but if you control Toon World and your opponent doesn't have any Toons, it can attack directly. Despite essentially being an objectively worse version of Cyber Dragon, which was released around a decade earlier, Toon Cyber Dragon was still good enough to see some play. This is mostly because of Chimeratech Megafleet Dragon, which can be made with a Cyber Dragon monster and one or more monsters in the extra monster zone. This means you could bring out a Cyber Dragon and then fuse away your opponent's monster in the extra monster zone, giving you Kaiju level removal with any Cyber Dragon. This matched up really well against the metagame at the time, as not only did most decks end on Link monsters, but they also needed to have those monsters on the field for their back row to be live. This meant Megafleet was a great way to turn off everything at once. While most people opted to just play the regular old Cyber Dragon for this purpose, Toon Cyber Dragon still had a small niche which allowed it to see some play as a tech card in a few decks. In some pure Sidra decks, it was essentially run as additional copies of Cyber Dragon, so that you'd have a higher chance of being able to start out your turn with a Megafleet. Its most interesting showing by far, though, was in Sky Striker decks. Toon Table of Contents is a universal searcher for Toon cards, which isn't once per turn, and can also search itself. This means you could use it to search itself twice before grabbing Toon Cyber Dragon, not only giving you a way to remove your opponent's key monster, but also 3 spells in the graveyard, which allows you to use the more powerful effects of your Sky Striker spells, swinging the entire game into your favor off a single card. And coming in at number 3, we have Adamancipator Analyzer. This is a level 4 Earth Rock Tuner monster, which of course can special summon itself from the hand if only your opponent controls a monster. During the main phase, it can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck and then special summon a level 4 lower non-tuner rock monster from among those cards. Even though it can't bring itself out for free during the first turn, Analyzer is still one of the best starters in Adamancipator decks. Since it's a rock and an Adamancipator name, putting it on the field enables you to summon both Adamancipator Seeker and Adamancipator Researcher from the hand, letting you further continue your combo. This deck is centered around these 3 tuner monsters, which all have the same excavate effect that is almost always a free summon as long as you have enough rocks in deck. These can net you powerful extenders such as Doki Doki and Prank Kid's Roxy's. Adamancipators were one of the first new decks to come out shortly after the beginning of Master Rule 5, and their strength at release made them one of the strongest combo decks we have ever gotten. This is in no small part due to Block Dragon, which can add all 3 tuners from the deck straight to your hand. This wouldn't last very long in the TCG, as Block Dragon was banned before there were any proper events for this deck to dominate in. Analyzer was great as the only archetypal level 4, which would let you more easily go into Gallant Granite, a rank 4 which can search any rock monster from the deck and kickstart your combo. However, this card was also a great way to bait interactions when going second. Its excavate effect is something your opponent absolutely cannot allow to resolve, since it has a chance to excavate Kokimiru Guardian, which is a monster negate. And if the opponent doesn't have a monster, you can synchro those 2 off into Dragite, which can potentially bounce an entire board. Analyzer was great at giving the deck a chance when going second, threatening all of this without even taking up the normal summon. And coming in at number 2, we have incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. This is a level 4 light spellcaster monster, which can special summon itself if the opponent controls more monsters than you do. But it can only special summon itself this way once per turn. In addition, during the main phase, this card can tribute itself as a quick effect to special summon either Fallen of Albaz or a Sword Soul monster from the deck. Finally, during the end phase, if a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard this turn, it adds itself back to the hand. Ecclesia is easily one of the most powerful monsters with this summoning condition, with enough versatility to let it see play in not just 1, but 2 meta decks. In Despia, this card was sometimes used as a light target for Branded Fusion when making Albion. Since this card adds itself back to your hand during the end phase, you'd be getting either a free material to go into something like Guardian Chimera during the opponent's turn, or a way to go into Albaz during the next turn to fuse away the opponent's field. Where this card really performed, though, was in Sword Soul. In some ways, Ecclesia fills a similar role to Analyzer, in that it's a decent in-engine tool for going second. In other ways, though, it's actually much stronger than that. It can summon either of your main starters, Taya or Moye, from the deck, giving you more consistent access to your engine. The way it brings itself out is actually an inherent summon instead of an effect, making it much more difficult to prevent. And its quick effect tag out can be amazing to play around interaction, since you contribute it in response to any spot removal. The fact that it brings itself out when the opponent has more monsters than you do, and not only if they have monsters and you don't, is also huge, since it means it won't conflict with your Tenyi plays as long as your opponent controls a couple of monsters. And on top of everything else, it's a tuner, which gives you a way to go into your archetypal synchros even if you can't bring out any tokens with your worms. Sword Soul is one of the best decks for around a year after its release, and Ecclesia certainly played a big role in that. Finally, at number 1, we have Dinowrestler Pankratops. This is a level 7 Earth Dinosaur with 2600 attack, which can special summon itself if the opponent controls more monsters than you do, but only once per turn. As a quick effect, it can tribute a Dinowrestler monster, including itself, to target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. Out of all the cards on this list, Pankratops is the only one which has had almost as much impact on the game as Cyber Dragon itself. Just like the original, this became a going second staple in almost every deck upon its release, due to its incredible matchup against a variety of popular end boards. With its impressive 2600 attack, it can beat over many common extra deck threats, and since it can tribute itself to pop a card on the field, it plays around removal exceptionally well, almost always trading 2 for 1. One of Pank's main strengths is how well it trades with Appaloosa boards, since it can beat over that in battle, and then deal with another threat once the Appo is down. Even back row decks aren't safe against this card, since if they put a monster on the field, it can remove pretty much every single floodgate before you start your plays. This card was so powerful that slower decks like Altergeist and Guru relied almost entirely on it when going second, often resorting to Pank beatdown to win the game. The impact this monster had on the meta was such that it had to be put to 1 towards the end of Master Rule 4, and it has never come back since. Even at 1 though, Pank has still seen tons of play, giving unparalleled utility from a single card in the side. To this day, the card is still played for its favorable matchup against Sprite, since it's an effective way to deal with Totally Awesome without having to commit much to the field. Nothing has released even close to Pank up until Kashtira Fenrir, which some consider to be a power-crept version of this card, and it had to be hit on the OCG ban list only a couple months after it came out. Even so, there's no denying that if Pank ever came back to 3, it'd probably be just as much of a force in the metagame as it used to be.
Hey there, it's me, TheDuelLogs. As you may have noticed, this episode has a bit of a different voice actor than me, and that's because I run 6 YouTube channels and need help to do the voice work. So expect more VAs in the future, but I'll still voice the majority of stuff.
And that's the list. If you happen to know any other cards we might have missed or any ideas for future videos like this one, please let us know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.